Alaska is one of the largest American states and one of the most isolated and brutal regions in the world. This vast, sprawling region has carried within it many terrifying stories and legends that have spread from its isolation. Add to that the uninhabited regions. The vast area that lies there is inhabited by a large number of people. One visit to the ground or to social media sites is enough to show us a huge number of villages and cities that have been labeled as ghost towns. The main reason is the abandonment of their people and residents, and the most exciting reason is the stories or incidents that led to this abandonment and departure. One of the most prominent of these cities or villages in Alaska is the village located in the far south of Alaska. It is called Portlock, a small village or city that was once densely populated and an important economic center. This village was named after the British naval captain Nancy Neale, who landed in that area in 1786. The area of that village and its comfortable terrain, on its shores, this village made it a suitable location for housing, especially since Portlock Bay and the rivers surrounding the village in general witnessed a great abundance of salmon. The availability of fish and the fertile nature attracted residents to the area and led to the establishment of a food canning factory, primarily salmon, of course. Here things were normal until the 40s of the last century, when the mass migration operations began, or rather the Great Flight from the village, and the reason was attacks, killings, dismembered floating corpses, and workers who had no trace. According to an article published in a newspaper in the year and according to a famous documentary that was broadcast. The first of these incidents or observations began in 1905. As we mentioned previously, a canning factory was established in that village, deliberately attracting many workers, most of whom were initially seasonal workers. That year, a number of villagers and seasonal workers complained about the presence of a huge animal that was bothering them and attacking their camps at night. However, the workers returned to their work in the following season, and most of them settled permanently in the village. However, what had disturbed their comfort at first returned with them as well. What made matters worse is that it could be said that many gold prospectors and wild animal hunters used to go to the mountains to do their work, and some of them never returned. These incidents were not taken seriously or taken into consideration until 1931. In this year, a woodcutter from the village was found murdered in the forest. A man was killed with a single blow. A blow or a punch that could have taken his life. Everyone who witnessed the incident agreed that it could not have been the work of a human, and the horror began in Portlock. Shortly after this incident, a group of hunters' wild deer found giant footprints of an animal. The area surrounding the footprints was completely destroyed. Tree branches were broken. In addition, there were traces of blood scattered throughout the area. The footprints were more than 46 centimeters per foot. In fact, one of the residents reported seeing a huge man covered in hair destroying one of the machines used in canning salmon. The man described the creature as literally resembling the devil. The man rushed to bring his weapon from his room, and when the monster, as he called it, was still there. The monster looked at the man, but shockingly, he left the area without harming a local man. Another man was hit with a huge tree trunk. The blow later led to his death, but before his death, the victim confirmed that a huge shadow surprised him with this fatal blow. The biggest irony is that the trunk that was used to kill the man was found close to the victim, covered in blood. Certainly, one man could not have carried this trunk. The horror did not stop there. Corpses of people, or rather, remains of bodies began to appear in the village bay. Swept across the rivers that flowed into the Gulf, the locals were convinced that whatever had befallen them had been done to them in the hills, mountains and forests surrounding Portlock. The disappearances, sightings and corpses, both whole and dismembered, reinforced the idea that prevailed in the village that the being or creature responsible for these operations was not a wild animal. That area knows its valleys and they will not be frightened by a wild animal or the like. So who do you think is to blame? Yes, on a mysterious mythical creature famous since ancient times, the owner of the Bigfoot or the Dabkefod, which bore his name here, that is, in Portlock. The locals were strongly convinced that it did not cause terror and fear. And the panic in their village and its surroundings for 40 years is this creature. This terror and fear was the main reason for the beginning of the waves of migration from Portlock to the surrounding villages and cities. However, the main cause of panic and fear was the Nantinak creature, as we mentioned, and the migration operations began in the 40s of the last century, specifically starting in the year 1942. In this year, families began to leave the village, fearing for their children from this deadly monster. The workers of the education factory continued. For a while they were on the job, but after a while they also began to leave to join their families. The people in charge of the canning factory sent armed guards in a desperate attempt to keep the factory open, but to no avail. The last person left in the village was the postman or the post office employee who also left the village and closed it. The office that opened in 1921 was finally closed, announcing the closure of the village or the village's emptiness of its inhabitants in 1951. Generations over the decades, Portlock has become a destination for adventure, excitement and ghost stories lovers, especially since its buildings, homes, food processing plant and most aspects of previous life there are still standing as a witness to the splendor of life that this town once enjoyed. A life that some of those who came from there are trying to restore by seriously thinking about reviving it. Founding their old village. But the question that always comes to their minds is whether what terrified their ancestors, killed their forefathers and forced them to leave, is still roaming the surrounding mountains and forests, and its victims are a question that will most likely not be answered unless life returns to the village of Portlock, Alaska, the famous ghost village. You, my friends, write to me in comments what do you think happened there? So my friends, this is what we had in store for us about Portlock, Alaska, the village that to this day remains a fertile place for lovers of excitement and mystery. The village that witnessed the most horrific and terrifying crimes ever, dismembered bodies and people missing without a trace, and the perpetrator is busy. Theories ranged from bears to wolves to murder, intruders and even the mythical creature known in various civilizations. But there is no conclusive evidence of the truth of what happened. As we mentioned, fingers were pointed at Bigfoot, the Yeti, Nantinak or whatever his name was. Someone must be found to blame him in order to evade responsibility. Just as happened in Portlock, Alaska, it is not the only ghost village or city in the world.